You're listening to the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast with Dean Jones. Today, Dean welcomes the talented Crystal King. Crystal is not only a culinary enthusiast and marketing expert, but also a Pushcart Prize-nominated poet and experienced educator who has taught at institutions like UMass Boston and T, a Harvard Extension School. Her historical novels, including In the Garden of Monsters, The Chef's Secret, and Feast of Sorrow, beautifully blend her passions. Let's dive in!
Welcome to the podcast. Today we're talking with author Crystal King, whose new book, In the Garden of Monsters, is garnering rave reviews. Crystal, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Crystal, can you tell us where you're from and where you live now in the United States?
So I hailed from the Pacific Northwest originally. I grew up in Eastern Washington and went to high school in Boise, Idaho, and lived in Seattle and California for a little bit. And then about 30 years ago, I made my way to Boston, and I've been here ever since and love it.
Very nice. Have you ever been to like Lewiston or Clarkston?
Yes.
Yeah, I used to live there, and I've lived in Rathdrum, Idaho, probably not
Oh,
far from
yeah.
Spokane.
Yeah. My best friend still lives in Priest Lake. So
Very nice. Yeah, I know that area. Yeah, we used to love going to Spokane. It was the big city, so that was always nice.
yeah, I lived in a little town outside of Spokane that no one has ever heard of. But yeah, it's a different world on that coast. It's interesting how much difference there is.
Oh yeah, I still have a lot of friends back there, and I go back there when I can. But I miss the beauty of it, but I love living in the Bay Area.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, growing up, did you have any idea? Did you want to at some point be an author? Was that your dream growing up?
I have always been writing. My mom has also the poems and stories I was writing when I was really young, like kindergarten age. I was a really early reader. By the age of 2, I was able to read quite a few things. I was the only
Wow.
kid in my kindergarten class that could read, and I was writing all alongside that. And some teacher had the foresight to send me to a young writers conference. And when I say young, I mean like I was 10. And I
Yeah.
met Madeline LaEngle, who wrote A Wrinkle in
Wow.
Time. And that was the coolest thing ever. And I thought, okay, this would be really cool. I would love to do this. So I went, I always was in AP English. I majored in English and literature. But when I got out of college, writing a book felt big. It just felt large. And so I wrote a lot of poetry. I ran a literary arts journal with a good friend of mine. And I I thought maybe I would just work on the fringes of literature. And then I went to school for my master's in critical and creative thinking. And my thesis ended up being what came out of that was a book proposal for a bunch of writing exercises for authors in progress. So, not like I need an idea, but I have a character that's stuck and I need to get them from one place to another. But agents told me no one knows who you are, so you should either teach or you should write a book, or someone else needs to write a book using these exercises. So that got me on the path to teaching. I started teaching. And then I thought at some point, this is not getting me where I need to go. And so with this idea, so I thought, okay, I'll write a book. And so I started writing a book about a celebrity chef that had a magical set of knives that traveled through time, and I needed an origin story for it. And I found a line about this guy Apicius, who's this ancient Roman gourmand. And so I decided, okay, I'll start my origin story for these knives there. But it was so interesting. I thought, no, I want to tell that story instead. So I ended up writing a book, and then my fourth one comes out later this year, and I have 2 others that are like in progress, and yeah, it's good. So
Now to that, you've gained quite a success. Your books are popular, and you even have a bit of a fan base. You're kind of a big deal. How does it feel now after all this time and all the work that you've done and the teaching to have this success now?
I just feel so excited that there's other people who like the nerdy things that I like, and that I get to tell these stories, and people are just as interested in the history and Italy and food in the same ways that I am. So it's very cool. I never really knew what would happen when I started writing books. You always hope that good things occur, and I've just been really lucky, and I've got great readers, and yeah, I love that they're all nerdy like I am. Well, maybe not as nerdy even.
Now, given your diverse background, professionally, you've been a novelist, culinary enthusiast, marketing expert, teacher. How do these passions intersect and inform your work now?
So when was I've been working in the marketing and PR sector for most of my career, and that's been the breadwinner job for me. Books is a bit of a harder prospect when it comes to putting food on the table. So I've always been in the marketing world, and for me, I chose that because I knew that I would always be writing and I would always be creative, and it was a job that I thought I could do potentially well. In PR, I started out in PR because I was writing stories. I wanted to be a journalist at one point, and then realized that maybe not wasn't quite the path I wanted. And so marketing just seemed like a good fit in that regard. And same with teaching. I was always teaching writing, or I was teaching creativity in some way. My master's I got in critical and creative thinking. So it was how do I create? How do I be creative? How do I think critically about the things that I'm doing and that's happening in the world? And so those things all just sort of intersect. And then somewhere in there, when I started writing this first book, I found a passion for Italy. And part of that fed into my passion for food. And I was a really, really picky eater when I was growing up. I mean, super picky. But then I met my husband, and he liked to go to nice restaurants, and he liked to cook. And I thought, okay, I like this guy. I'm going to try everything once. And it turned out I liked a lot of things. And so it just sort of seemed when I get excited about something, I just kind of weave it into everything else I'm doing. I figure that life is really short, so you should enjoy everything you're doing. And so I think that I've chosen different things that I'm interested in that can naturally intersect with each other.
A lot of your books are deeply influenced by Italian history and culture. Did you have like what was the chicken and egg moment? Did you go to Italy and travel there and get to like be really captivated for it? Did you have like an epiphany about Italy and its culture and history?
Not well, yeah, yes, in a way. My husband's mother was she was second generation Italian, and so she was always saying funny little Italian phrases. She's from Puglia, and with a dialect. And but I started learning Italian a little bit just so I could talk, just to because I thought she'd find it fun, and and then I was writing this book that's set in ancient Rome. And I've always loved ancient history, always, since I was like little kid. I loved the Greek myths and the Roman stories and all the archaeology. And in history, I loved ancient history, and I was not excited about American history. And uh, I thought, but when I wrote Feast of Sorrow, and I was done with the book actually. And I grew up very in a very financially strapped family, and I didn't have a lot of money, and my husband and I didn't have the means for a big chunk of the first part of the time that we were married. But around the time I finished Feast of Sorrow, we finally were like, let's just go. Let's go to Italy. He had never been, I had never been. And so the second I set foot in Rome for the first time, I just was in love. I knew this was a place I should be in some form or another over and over, and which I have been since then. And so and I'm so captivated with so many different parts of Italy that I have, and there's so many stories I could tell that are set there. So it's become a real wonderful backdrop for personal enjoyment, but also for these stories that I'm telling.
Having recently read In a Garden of Monsters, I'm really excited to get to talk to you about this because I'm kind of geeking out a little bit and I'm being a bit of a fan here because I really loved it, and I love the way you approach the myth of Hades and Persephone. Also, I love that you included Salvador Dali and surrealism and Sacrobosco, Italy's Garden of Monsters. Can we talk about this and how you got the inspiration for the book?
Yeah, so it's definitely a swerve from my previous novels, which are about culinary figures in Italian history. So my first novel was about this ancient Roman gourmand Apicius. My second was about Bartolomeo Scopi, who is famous for his 1570 cookbook in the Renaissance, time of Michelangelo and all that. And so this one, it jumps to 1948. It's got a huge fantasy element, and but it's still set in Italy. And there's more food in this book than there is in my previous books, I believe. I hadn't ever intended on writing anything there, but I was trying to sell a book about an Italian Renaissance meat carver, this guy named Vincenzo Cervio, who was a steward to a few different cardinals and wealthy men. And I thought that this might sell, but COVID hit and it just
Mm.
wasn't. And I was frustrated. My editor at the time didn't want it. She wanted different styles of books, and she didn't think that Renaissance historical fiction was it. And so here I was a little bit stranded. And then with COVID, it's just people weren't buying books in the same way. And so my friend, Chris Walder, who is a Gothic novelist, and she writes wonderful Gothic stories. She and I were talking, and I was like, I just want to write a book that would sell. What would I write that could sell? And she's like, well, Gothics are hot. And I thought of this garden that I had visited when I was doing the research for the meat carver book. I had gone to this town called Caparola, and our driver said, well, there's this really weird garden nearby. Do you want to go check it out? So I went ahead and did that. So that was a couple years prior, but and talking to her, I was thinking that is the perfect place for a crazy Gothic novel. So what would that look like? So I started going through my photos and doing a little bit of research. Then I realized that there are statues. Well, there's the Mouth of Hell, which is the Orco, which is a statue of that is like a mouth carved into a rock that you can walk into, and there's a table inside that seats four people. And
Oh,
so
wow.
it's like this just, and when you're standing outside of it, that table looks like a tongue. So you can eat or be eaten is kind of the idea of it. And so I thought, okay, there's the mouth of hell is there. Demeter, the statue of Demeter, or Ceres in the Roman vernacular, she is facing the mouth of hell, waiting for her daughter to come back. And then further on in the garden, there is a statue of Persephone as a bench. Her legs are widespread, and there's a bench that you can sit on and be basically in her arms. And then you go up the hillside a little bit further, and you pass Cerberus, and you go to this temple that represents heaven, or the upper the Elysium, essentially. And I thought, okay, there's the myth of Hades and Persephone in this crazy Gothic garden. There's a creepy castle on the hill. Let's do it. And then I realized that Salvador Dali went there in 1948. And I thought, okay, should I? Because I wasn't sure I should, because it was a very controversial figure in his life. And today he would be canceled in a hot second. He was just, he was a deviant. He was a racist. He was a misogynist. He, he admired dictators. I don't think he cared that much about what the dictators did. He just admired the power they wielded. And so I thought, should I even write about this guy? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that he was so perfect for this garden and this story. And so I went ahead and went for it and decided to make sure that my characters reacted to him in a way that would make sense for somebody who was such a weirdo, really.
How the research for this must have been really fun. How did this influence the writing? Like, you must have had a really great time getting to go back and study the history of this period.
It was a lot of fun, and the garden is so fascinating on its own. And I talked to a couple different historians who had studied the garden. So and scholars have been trying to interpret what the garden meant or means, and have been for a long time. And there's many theories about it. So I got to play with what some of those theories might be. And then, of course, researching Dali was just wild. And one of the cool things I found is that Dali loved food. And so it really made sense. He has a cookbook that came out in, I think it came out in 1973, but the art on the cover says 1971, his Dîners de Gala. And he has all this like food in this cookbook, including the first recipe I've ever seen for avocado French toast or avocado toast.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
but his avocado toast has lamb brains in it, so people
I'll
probably
pass
aren't
on
going
that
to
one. Yeah.
make it anytime soon. But so it was kind of fun, and I wasn't excited about Dali before I started really researching him, but now I actually own a couple Dali. I own some plates
Ooh.
that correspond to the dinner, and a bronze medal that goes along with the cookbook. And my husband bought me a lithograph of Cerberus and rearing back at Dante, which is perfect because I have that scene kind of. I have a scene like that in my book where I talk about that. So yeah, it was very cool.
I loved the book, and I had a chance to. I love audiobooks. I'm a big audiobook fan. So, in addition to having the physical copy of the book, I listened to the audiobook, which I love. What do you think? Because your books have been done as audiobooks. What do you think of that when you get to listen to that? I always wonder how authors feel about the audio productions of the work.
It is the weirdest feeling or the weirdest thing to like listen back to my books. When I first listened to Feast of Sorrow, the first time I was driving in my car, and I have this bodyguard to Apicius, the main character, and he's this big, beefy Egyptian guy that you do not want to meet in a dark alley. And she does the guy that was doing it did the voice for him, and I never had pictured what he said this guy's soda sounded like. I just never had it in my mind, and I burst out laughing so hard in the car that anybody near me must have just thought I was insane. But that grew on me. That grew on me. I really loved that story told as an audiobook. It's a strange feeling because it seems like somebody else wrote the story when I listen. I know the story, of course. I know everything that's going to happen, and I know most of the words that are going to be said. But when, like the narrator for In the Garden of Monsters, Carlotta, I am blanking on her last name, but she,
It's Carlotta Brenton.
yes, Carlotta Brenton. She was absolutely wonderful because she does all the accents. And I have a lot of accents going on in my book. I've got Italian, I've got Spanish and Catalan and French and Russian, and so there's a lot of things happening in this book. And so she was really brilliant at that. And it's just weird. It's like somebody else wrote this book, and I'm listening to it and I'm enjoying it, but it doesn't seem like I did it. It seems unbelievable that my words could be like that. It's just I don't know. It's a funny, weird feeling for me.
Now you have a nice speaking voice, and you do, media work. Did they ever considered having you do the reading of the book?
No, and I'm okay with that. I think because a lot of the reading has because of like the accents and the voices and things like that, I don't think I could do justice in the way
Yeah.
that some of the audiobook readers do today. I don't think I could do that. I could certainly read it, and it might be interesting to hear me read it, but I wouldn't be able to give the nuance I think that those that professional audiobook readers can do.
I want to ask too, all your books have really, really beautifully done. The covers are excellent. Especially, I really liked In the Garden of Monsters. I thought it really popped. It has a Moorish quality, makes people want to pick it up and read it. How did you feel about seeing the physical copies of the books once you got them?
So for my first two books were published by Atria, which is a different publisher than my current publisher now, Mira Books,
Mhm.
and I didn't have as much of a say with Atria. I kind of had a no. And if I and I did put my foot down about a couple inaccuracies on the covers for those books. And I loved how they turned out, but there wasn't as much back and forth in the same way as with my current publisher, which I've really appreciated. But the cool thing is I haven't needed a ton of back and forth because the covers that they presented me with have been amazing. With In the Garden of Monsters, they asked me just kind of in general if I had any ideas, and I said, of course, I'd love to see the monster mouth, the mouth of the Orko on there somewhere. So when they brought it back to me, it was absolutely perfect. It was originally red though, and not the teal blue that it is now. And we decided that, but then some of the feedback from the team came back that it seemed a bit more like a Chinese dragon type of like when you saw it, you went, oh yeah, it does do that. So it might give you the idea it's a different kind of story. And the woman on the front cover also was we put her originally in like a 1948 kind of dress because that made more sense because there's no Greek woman in the book not, like this that walks into the mouth. But she looked like a little girl, the silhouette did. So we put it into the Greek chiton and said, okay, then at least readers when they see it will understand it. And I have a book coming out this fall, and they asked me, what cover designs comparable covers do you like? And I was able to tell them, I like, these covers. So they went and found a couple of, the author for a couple of the covers that I liked, or the designer, and went back to them and picked them. And I was just like, that's amazing. And they did that with the audiobook too. I didn't have a choice in the audio. I didn't have any say. I didn't even know who was gonna do it until it was final and presented to me on my first two books. But I chose Carlotta, so I had the option to do that, and that was really cool, and I'm very grateful for that.
That's I love hearing things like that. I like when they actually work with the authors and kind of give them some say, because I feel like authors usually can really give good advice on that and really help steer them in a good direction.
Yeah, I mean, we are the product. I
Yeah.
mean, quite literally. So
Yeah.
when publishers aren't working with the author, it's frustrating. So I'm really grateful for Mira. They've been really good to me.
Now, going back to research, I want to ask about your work on the chef's secret. You talk about this is set in Renaissance Rome, and it deals with the mysterious life of one of the most famous chefs in history. Was that fun research? Was there any kind of revelations or things you found out during this work for this book?
Oh, so much. There's so much interesting things that happened in Italian food history in that time frame. So Scopi, his cookbook has 1,000 recipes in it. It's an incredible tome of food. It's been published in English by Terence Scully, translated into English, and cooking the recipes was amazing. Was super fun. That was a lot of fun. There is a recipe for fried chicken in it, for example, which far predates the fried chicken you might find in the United States, or there's some thought that maybe the Scots brought it to the South, or
Yeah.
to America and then to the South. But this is a recipe for fried chicken. You bread it and you fry it. The only difference is that their spices are Renaissance spices. It's cloves and nutmeg and cinnamon, and that's really weird on fried chicken. I'll just say that.
I imagine it would be.
But but there's recipes in it from the early, like, that we now understand, that's just part of Italian uh like just part of Italian food life. So some of the first pastas, there's recipe for macaroni in there. You see the first recipe for zabaglione, which was originally made for pregnant women. It would they thought that the egg dish would nourish their weakened their weakened state. So these women were
Oh,
eating dessert every day, which was at least good for them. But and it was just an interesting time. This was a time of when, well, of course, all through history, we have people that demonstrate their wealth through the food that they can purchase and the way that they can have it presented and the way that it's eaten. And so it's been fascinating to me to explore those various stages. And then, of course, researching Feast of Sorrow and the Chef's Secret gave me a lot of fodder for when I wrote in the Garden of Monsters, because I have a series of feasts that occur over the period of a week. And
Yeah.
some of those dishes harken back to the time. There's some of those are scoppy dishes from the Chef's Secret, and they're. I don't think I do too much with ancient Rome because it didn't make sense for the characters. But there's a lot of scoppy dishes in the feasts that they eat in the Garden of Monsters.
I think Americans probably have heard of the Feast of the Seven Fishes from the show The Bear, but I think we're not too familiar with some of the calendar feasts that are part of the Catholic Church. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I don't really delve too deeply into that in my novels because I'm not Catholic, first of all, so I'm not
Mm.
the best um
I'm not either.
yeah, so the best person to really talk too much to that. But it certainly played a part in the Chef's Secret because the Scopi cookbook is laid out so that you have non meat days and dishes for like Friday when it would just be fish and you wouldn't have lamb or whatever it was they were eating at the time. And
Yeah.
so it certainly the Catholic feast days influenced the history of food in really significant ways. And I don't really talk too much about that in my books, but I certainly have had to navigate a little bit of that when it comes to what they're eating at different times. So.
I got to ask about Feast of Sorrow because this is a kind of the plot line is very exciting. You have scandal, wealth, politics, and ambition. Tell me somebody has come to you to make this into a film or a mini
Ah,
series at
God,
some
I
point.
wish I would hope so. I just need that right person to check it out. And everyone loves ancient Rome, right? So, and you throw food into it, it's got to be a thing. Like, it's kind of like the bear meets gladiator, I guess, right?
Yes, this sounds like a no-brainer. Like, why is Netflix not pounding at your door to
Yeah.
put this out?
And it's a tragedy and it's a real story in some ways. It plays with history. I tried to stay as true to history as I possibly could, and it takes place in the time of Augustus and Tiberius, and Apicius was a real person. We know a little bit about his life. In particular, we know how he died, which is why I decided to write the book, because I was fascinated with how a man died like that. He died in just this whacked way. And I was like, how did that happen? So I tell the story of how he got to that point in his life and how his ambition outgrew his wealth, essentially. And he wanted to be gastronomic advisor to Caesar and to Augustus Caesar and to Tiberius Caesar. And Sejanus is involved. He wants to overthrow Tiberius. Like there's so much political intrigue involved. Yeah, it's all there.
Now, you must have had to do a lot of research this specifically for this one because you wanted to make the food of Rome come alive. What did you learn about Roman food? I think that they have talked about it or touched on it in some of the miniseries like Rome, etc. What did you learn personally about the way the Romans ate?
Oh, I did so much research on that book because I was really terrified that because there's people that are really, really into ancient Rome, like
Yeah.
want to change the world into the Roman religion and the way of government and things like that. And I was just really nervous that people would find out that I was not a trained historian and that I got everything wrong. And so I researched for probably a year and a half before I started writing it. And I really, really wanted to get all the details right. The food is absolutely fascinating. The way that they ate, those traditions that we have carried through to today in a lot of ways. Like the concept of fast food is not new.
Yeah.
It's not something we invented in our modern times. The ancient Romans lived in wooden houses, insulae in the city center, sometimes 3 or 4 stories high, and you couldn't light a fire on your third floor to cook your food. So you would go to the taberna down the street and get your food cooked for you at the fast food counter, right? So, and you can still see some of those in Pompeii. So it's things like that were interesting. We still use the fish sauce in almost the same format. Garum was kind of the first factory item that we know of. It was manufactured the best was manufactured in Spain, but it was manufactured in lots of places along the coastlines. And today they still make Vietnamese fish sauce in almost exactly the same way. So that was interesting. They didn't have lemons in the time frame I was writing, which I would have thought it's part of Italian cuisine. Tomatoes didn't appear until the early part of the Renaissance, and so that wasn't part of Italian cuisine. But they loved donuts, but not with holes in it. They loved fritters. They loved
Yeah.
fried food, and that goes back to like the fast food thing. You know, you need something that was fast. So there was a lot of really fascinating things that I learned about that time frame, and I got to talk with and meet with a lot of different food historians from that time as well that studied that time frame, and that's been wonderful. And I've made some really good friendships there.
I want to ask, circle back to in the Garden of Monsters. So what have you thought about the popularity of the book and how it's being received, and what kind of do you want to leave the listeners with as a kind of a example of the book? Talk about it a little bit to kind of give them an idea of what to expect when they read it.
So it's a story about Julia, a woman whose mind is not quite as strong as she would like. She doesn't remember a lot of her past. And she gets this invitation. She's a model, and she's an art student who has just graduated from the academia. She gets an invitation to model for Salvador Dali. And something about it intrigues her in a way that is inexplicable. And so she goes and spends an entire wild week being the model for Salvador Dali. But she also is there there's a bunch of other people in the garden. And one of them is this very enigmatic host, that Ignacio, who is fascinating to Julia. And I'm just going to leave it with that. But there's so much food in the book. And there is a lot of history, actually. And the garden is a real place. So this is the other thing that's very cool. You can go to my website and see all the photos of the garden. You can also, there's a page on my site also about Salvador Dali, so you can learn more about him, because a lot of people just know his clock paintings. They don't really know about the strangeness that he lived. He was just
Yeah.
an odd duck, right?
Yeah.
But and then the other thing is that I have a downloadable cookbook for this book that's free, and you can go to my website crystalking.com and download it and try some of the recipes, which you can also do. I have read cookbooks for Feast of Sorrow and for the Chef's Secret as well there too.
I've downloaded it, and I wanted to recommend that to people because it's really a good job. Are you looking at maybe putting out a cookbook at some time in the future?
Oh, I don't know. Cookbooks are a lot of work.
They
Even
are.
doing what I did was a lot. And I have a lot of contributors. So I don't know. Maybe I won't say no, because you never say never. But
Well, Crystal, I want to thank you for being on the podcast. I've loved getting a chance to talk to you. We have links in the bio so to people to purchase your books online, or you can get them at all better bookstores. Crystal, thank you for being on the podcast.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of another insightful episode of the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. A huge thank you to our wonderful guest today, Crystal King, for sharing her passion for history, Italian culture, and of course, her fantastic books, In the Garden of Monsters, The Chef's Secret, and Feast of Sorrow. Be sure to check them out, and perhaps even add a little historical culinary adventure to your reading list. Thank you for joining host Dean Jones for this episode of the Well Seasoned Librarian. Until next time, we will see you in the library.